So with that, I'd like please join me in welcoming Dr. Centeno. This is in conjunction with the events of Women's Week. Dr. Centeno will be talking about leading ladies.
Am I on? It's on? Okay. All right. Thank you. So I have a pretty loud voice if I want to. All right. So good evening. Thank you for coming out tonight. So first, I want to know what you think the world would look like if women ruled. What would it look like? Julie?
I had very strong feelings about this when my daughter was a baby. I just thought there should be a breastfeeding mother with a baby at every important meeting of anything everywhere.
Right, great.
You might have some different priorities.
It would look a lot better.
Nick?
Peaceful.
So sure. You think? Okay. All right. Lori?
There would be more trees because women plant them instead of cutting them down.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, what kinds of assumptions are we making then about women in power?
They're
Dr.
much
Crowley.
more nurturing when they approach things and they negotiate instead of pummel.
Well, I think my daughter would agree. I have rarely ever been described as nurturing.
I didn't say my assumption was true.
Well, let's see as we go through. There's a professor at Johns Hopkins University named Francis Fukuyama. And in 1998, he published an article titled Women and the Evolution of World Politics. And he argued that women, in fact, are more peaceful than men, that men are naturally aggressive, and his evidence, right, what he uses to support his argument are chimpanzees. Keep in mind that he's a political scientist, not a primatologist. And so he points out that male chimpanzees are very aggressive and females are nurturing and cooperative. And like with the chimpanzees, violence in human society is mostly perpetrated by men. It's just biology. And he goes on to say that a world run by women would follow different rules because women are less supportive of military spending, less supportive of war. Tell that to Margaret Thatcher, Sarah Palin, among actually a number of others. But he implies that this opposition to war would be bad. Bad for world politics. So remember that this was written by a political science PhD in 1998, not 1898. But this attitude kind of remains today, not quite as overtly, and things are changing, but I still regularly encounter these views that because women are more peaceful and all this sort of thing, they simply are not good world leaders. They're not tough enough. So, another professor, Joanne Tickner, a feminist scholar of international relations, wrote a response to Fukuyama. And what would you guess she said? And I tend to ask questions because that's what I do in class, and if I do that, I'll get through maybe 2 pages and not to the end. So I'll ask the questions, but then don't answer them. Hopefully we're going to have a little bit of time at the end. So obviously, Tickner was irritated with Fukuyama, and she argued that this idea that women are somehow morally superior, more peaceful, has actually worked to keep women out of power. Why? Due to gender stereotypes, that men, with their assertiveness and aggression, are active, and women, because this idea that they're more peaceful, makes them passive, right? And we want leaders who are active. We don't want leaders who are passive. So this idea hurts women's credibility in terms of power in international relations because it makes it seem that women aren't tough enough to handle world politics. And so the accusation that Tickner launches against Fukuyama is that even though he says that women are morally superior because they're more peaceful, he is really implying that, you know, we don't want women in world politics because we need tough, aggressive men to handle, you know, the rogue states of the world. We need real men in charge because women wouldn't be able to handle not even rogue states anymore, but you know, non-state actors like Islamic State. A peaceful woman could not handle Islamic State. But we have to ask, if men are so naturally aggressive, how do we then explain why some countries are more peaceful than others, even when they're being run by men? Now, a different biological argument that works to keep women out of power is that women are too erratic, too emotional. So not morally superior at all, just crazy. I went to high school at the end of the Cold War, the Reagan era, and I remember being told that a woman couldn't be president because if she had what if she had PMS and pushed the button? For you younger people, that means initiating nuclear war, right? Pushing the button. So 25 years later, I'm teaching Intro to Women's Studies right now, and one of my students brought up in an assignment that a friend of hers said that a woman couldn't be president because she'd get all crazy during her period and start a war. So 25 years later, this still sort of persists. Now, feminist international relations scholars do not argue that women should rule the world or that women are more peaceful. They argue that if we put women up on a pedestal as morally superior, then we keep women from ever claiming any power. They're up on a pedestal, then they can't get involved in change, right? They're kept passive. Right? If you're up on a pedestal, you can't move. So, Fukuyama's nice talk about how great women are is really just a way to keep women powerless. This is Tickner's argument. So, let's look at some women who have actually gained some world power in spite of persistent attitudes about their inability to rule. But first, quiz question. Which country elected the world's very first female head of state?
Ireland.
Sweden.
I'll give you a hint. Not a Western developed country.
Indonesia.
Not Indonesia.
Malaysia.
You're getting closer. Sri Lanka. Of course, Sri Lanka. You all knew that. You were just pretending not to know. Now, any guesses as to how many women in the world serve in national executive positions? In other words, how many female world leaders are there? The answer is not so cut and dry.
Like right now? Or?
Right now. At this very moment, unless there's been a coup in the last 10 minutes.
23.
Well, I'll give you a hint. So, 18 countries in the world, and just to, again, that's just a hint. That's not the answer of how many women. I'll give you, it's just to give you a little context, there are 193 countries in the UN. But that's also a little bit deceptive because there are more countries than members of the UN. There are 23 individual women executives. 18 countries, 23 individual women executives. I am not above a cheap laugh. One country has 3 female executives. Another has 2. And then there are 2 countries that are not officially recognized by most countries. They're not members of the UN. They're not recognized even as existing outside of the UN. So Switzerland is an unusual case. Switzerland is run by a 7-member federal council, which also acts as the country's cabinet. So it's a cabinet and executive in one. And currently there are 3 members of the 7 who are women. One of those 3, Simonetta Sommaruga, serves as the president, which is really just a ceremonial title. She's the one who actually signs the stuff, but it rotates from year to year among all 7 members. All 3 of those women have served as president in the past. It's like every 2 years. They give it to a woman. Denmark is a constitutional monarchy. It has women in both its official and ceremonial executive positions. So there's debate about whether queens should be included. I decided to include them because they continue in constitutional monarchies such as Denmark and Great Britain to exert really important ceremonial power. They're very important to the traditions of their countries, and yeah, so I've included them. So the 2 queens who do reign in their own right, yes, they are ceremonial, but I count them nominally. So in Denmark, by the way, Queen Margrethe is the first female monarch since Margrethe I, who ruled Scandinavia in 1375. Queens were not allowed to rule after the first Margrethe until 1975. There was a new act of succession in 1975 that allowed women to rule if they didn't have brothers, which is still the case. She is considered Europe's most intellectual queen, which is no surprise because she studied political science. But fun fact, she illustrated the 1977 edition of J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. It was under a pseudonym, Ingehild Grasmer. Then there are the 2 leaders of countries that have broken away and declared independence but are not recognized by every country in the international community. So Atifete Jajaga is the president of Kosovo, which declared independence from Serbia in 2008. Currently, 110 countries recognize Kosovo as independent, including the United States, but 83 do not, including Serbia itself, hence the problem, Russia, another problem, and a number of European countries. So it's not technically sovereign until it settles the matter really with Serbia. And Russia says that is okay. Prime Minister Tatiana Turinskaya of Transnistria, well, she is the Prime Minister, sorry, of Transnistria. And this is a breakaway state of Moldova, which has also had a female president. It's a dual executive system, so there's both a Prime Minister and a president. Both offices have been filled by women in the past few years. This territory has been disputed since 1990. But it's not an officially recognized state separate from Moldova. And there is absolutely no information on her in a language that I can read. So if, as I continue this research, either she'll be replaced by someone else, or I'll learn how to read Russian. So, even if we count queens and leaders of breakaway states, not even 10% of all executive leaders in the world are women. Then we have to ask, what do women leaders in the world have in common with one another? They've all had to deal with gender issues of some sort. People questioning their abilities as women to rule. And that is not insignificant. But beyond that, what do these women have in common? A quick anecdote here. When women were struggling for suffrage in the early 20th century, a British member of Parliament said that because women tend to make up the majority in, slightly more than half the population of most countries. It's usually about 51% female, 49% male, except for India and China. Because of that, that if women were given the vote, they would take over. Right? They become the instant majority and they will take over. It has yet to happen. Why? Why has that yet to happen? Well, we have to ask, is woman a universal category? Do all women think and act the same way in a way that's recognizable across cultures and political contexts? Do all men think and act the same way? Is man a universal category? I would argue that it's not. But based on expectations about how women behave as leaders, cooperatively and compassionately, measured against actual women, there have been attempts to categorize female leaders as of two types. So, attempt to look at different female leaders and fit them into these boxes. So, as either Iron Ladies or Mothers of Nations. So, Margaret Thatcher is the original Iron Lady. Right? She's characterized as having a more traditionally male style. And Corazon Aquino of the Philippines was one of the first to be called the mother of a nation. And she was more traditionally female. So it seems that while male leaders can be multifaceted, women, if not universal, must fit into these binary categories. But the problem is we really don't have a large enough sample to be able to make any generalizations yet. We simply don't have enough. Leadership studies demonstrate that while male politicians can adopt leadership strategies that are viewed as either male or female and be praised, so that men can be praised for adopting a male style, and some, depending on how well they do it, can be praised even if they use a female style of leadership. Women cannot. This is called the double bind, right? Women are viewed negatively if they take on a male style, right? Because that's not feminine. But they're also viewed as weak or ineffectual if they behave in a traditionally feminine way. Right? So it's the double bind. Fun fact here, by the way, the Republican Party has just recently told some of its female candidates to stop saying they will cooperate. Stop saying that. And that's true story. Look it up. Look it up. Another difficulty in trying to sort of pin down these women and fit them into boxes is that not all women politicians automatically support what we call women's issues. Reproductive rights, for example, can be a very divisive issue among women. And in the end, party affiliation and ideology, liberal, moderate, conservative, seems to trump gender. I mean, I'm probably not going to vote for Sarah Palin or Michelle Bachmann out of some sense of gender solidarity. I'm just not going to do it. The studies that demonstrate that ideology trumps gender have been done in the United States, and largely in terms of the legislative branch, federally. But might this be true internationally as well? And that's what I'm trying to determine. Again, we don't yet have a large enough sample of women leaders to be able to make any real generalizations, but over time, and I'm trying to see if some patterns are starting to emerge here. So let's see where our women leaders around the world stand ideologically, and that's how I have categorized them. And I wanted to talk about each individually, but I ended up with 12 pages of notes. So I'll talk about what I think are the most interesting cases. So starting on the left, two Latin American leaders. So, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner is currently in her second term. She is the widow of a former president, Nestor Kirchner, and some say she only won the presidency, on his coattails. But she was reelected in a landslide even after he had died. And she's managed to become very unpopular without any assistance at all. She is included as part of the pink tide of Latin America, so followers of Hugo Chávez's 21st century socialism, at least rhetorically. She has nationalized the petroleum industry. She has decreased unemployment significantly, but the wealth still remains in very few hands. The poverty rate is still abysmal, and she does wear Prada. I don't know if you can really be a socialist of the 21st century and wear Prada. But recently, she successfully pushed for the legalization of gay marriage, the first in Latin America to do so, but not abortion. So again, it's where abortion can be a really divisive issue among women. And just last month, she sent out a racist tweet about the Chinese. So take that as you will, about how, we can't exactly fit our understanding of what constitutes progressive or liberal on other cultures, but she seems to kind of be everywhere. Michelle Bachelet, and let me explain that in Spanish, these what look like French names, and they are originally French names, but they are pronounced in Spanish. So it is Bachelet and Pinochet, and I'm not pronouncing that incorrectly. So Michelle Bachelet was imprisoned and tortured along with her parents under the Pinochet regime, and she was she fled the country, it's in exile. When the Pinochet dictatorship ended, she became the first woman to serve as the Minister of Defense, before she became the first woman president in 2006. This is her second time as president, and there was a term in between her first and second term. I put her on the left because she's the Socialist Party. She's of the Socialist Party, but she's not a Chavez-style socialist like Fernandez de Kirchner in Argentina. The Chilean socialists are more progressive than hardliner, but you can see they love their leaders, though. She's got the tattoo of her on someone's leg there. She is a self-described feminist. In between her terms as president, she was director of UN Women, and just recently signed a bill to ease the very strict abortion laws in Chile. And she wants to create a stronger social safety net, since it was basically shredded by her predecessor. And show my bias again, not that I've really tried to hide it. She is my favorite among all of the leaders. So, if we look at the center left. Let's see, Maria Luisa Coleto Preca. She is the second woman to hold the post of head of state in Malta, so she's the second woman. She was the first president to ever be elected with the unanimous approval of all members of parliament. Unanimous. She was the Minister of Family and Social Solidarity, and even as president, when she was no longer the minister, she kept those national strategies against poverty and the food aid program that she had started. She stayed in charge of those because they were so important to her. And she's been, one of the leaders who's been described as one of the mothers, the more recent mothers of nations. Prime Minister Portia Simpson Miller in her second term. And in 2012, she called to break with the British monarchy. She called to make Jamaica a republic, and she also promotes full civil rights for gays and lesbians. Both of these are very controversial stances in Jamaica, and she seems to be losing some popularity as a result of those decisions. Dilma Rousseff is a member of the Workers' Party. Her party is the Workers' Party, which sounds like it would be harder left. And it was once quite far left. She was an underground revolutionary at one time. But she now, she got on the globalization bandwagon. Institutes more market-friendly policies. She is the 4th most powerful woman and 31st most powerful person in the world, according to Forbes. Forbes ranks these things. Her administration has not been without controversy, the usual corruption charges, but also things like forcibly removing indigenous people from their land in order to construct a dam, spending billions on construction for the World Cup and the Olympics, while there's such a degree of poverty and things like that. I should note that there have been 3 other female leaders in Latin America: Costa Rica, Panama, and Nicaragua. So a total of 6 so far. I mentioned Simonetta Sommaruga before, and just a fun fact about the women of Switzerland: each one on the council is from a different party. So there's one that's center-left, one that's centrist, and one that's center-right. So they represent different ideologies. Let's see. I had shown you the Prime Minister of Denmark previously, and her election ended a 10-year rule by the far-right nationalist. And it's an interesting thing that's going on in the Scandinavian countries now. Nationalism has really swept in the right wing, the far right wing in some countries, but swept them out in others. So immigration is really a key issue. And if we have time, I'd like to talk about that a little bit more. All right, and then of course, Queen Margrethe is called the Progressive Queen, so I also put her here in the center left. Now, among women who lead countries that are not yet fully recognized, Atifete Jajaga is the first nonpartisan candidate to win her position. So she's officially nonpartisan. She's declared no party. But if you look at her policies, women's empowerment, dialogue among ethnic groups, EU membership, she seems to fit pretty well into the center left. And like I said, there is nothing written about Tatiana. So we look to the center here. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, there's some debate about whether she is center-left or center. I would argue that she's centrist for reasons that I'll explain here in a minute. She is the first elected female head of state in Africa, won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2011. She is now, according to Forbes, the 70th most powerful woman in the world. She has a degree in economics from UC Boulder, Master's of Public Administration from Harvard. She's worked for both the World Bank and Citibank. So she's not critical of capitalism. And generally sort of in international relations, one's support for capitalism is kind of where how we place people on the left-right spectrum. If they support capitalism but also promote some social policies, then we tend to put them in the center. When Ellen Johnson Sirleaf first ran, gender was an issue in her favor. People were saying that after so much war, the country needed a woman, needed a mother figure. So again, there's this assumption that women are more compassionate. Sorry? Oh. Catherine Samba-Panza just became the transitional president of the Central African Republic about a year ago, and she's been given the responsibility of leading the country, which is essentially a failed state, in the midst of civil war, leading that country to national elections. It's a lot of pressure. And so another woman who also viewed as being more compassionate, and that was what the country needed after so much war. But she had to demonstrate that she had absolutely no links to either side of the war. She is purposefully and decidedly nonpartisan. So, you know, if a reporter from a newspaper on one side does an interview with her, she has to immediately call and do an interview with the other side, so she can be always viewed as nonpartisan. And Dalia Grybauskaitė is the first woman executive of Lithuania, recently elected to a second term. She's an independent, but she's supported by the Conservative Party. At the same time, she's taken a hard stance against Russia, although that's not surprising considering it's Lithuania. But she boycotted the Olympics in Russia because she supports LGBT rights, and she promotes some social policies that make her a little bit more centrist than strictly right. And let's see, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina Wahed is the only Muslim ruler currently. So she heads this mainstream party that represents secular Muslims, and they're very clear about that. And that might sound like an oxymoron, secular Muslims, but it's meant as an identity marker that distinguishes that group from both the Islamists and the Hindus. So that's how they distinguish there. So, like I said, she's the only Muslim leader currently, but there have been a number of Muslim women leaders, which is contrary to sort of perception that we get in the United States. All right, if we move to the center right, there's another of the Swiss women. And then Pak Geun-hye is the first female head of state in Northern Asia in the modern era. She actually served as the first lady of South Korea when her dad was president/dictator. And she is, again, according to Forbes, the most powerful woman in Asia, the 11th most powerful woman in the world. She is starting to get increasing opposition from her party, so we'll see. Chancellor Angela Merkel is probably the most powerful woman in the world. She's been in power for 10 years now. She's one of the top 5 most powerful people in Europe. She's popular because Germans tend to see her as having this steady hand. In her first term, she coped with the global financial crisis. In her second term, she kept the euro crisis at bay. And she's now in her third term and is Europe's leader confronting Russia over Ukraine. Let's see. Prime Minister Ernest Solberg, I have to admit, when I first started this, I was surprised by the popularity of the Conservative Party in Norway because Scandinavia does tend a little more towards the left. But it is really due to immigration. That is the hot button issue now. Norway has had a larger influx of immigrants recently than other parts of Scandinavia, and it's really divided the country. And so this is one of the significant variables to explain Norway's recent shift to the right. I was going to mention, I don't have a lot of time to talk about it, but Eva Kopacz is I wanted to mention her because she calls herself the mother-in-chief, right? So she accepts this identity as, a mother of nations. But she seems a lot like my mom, who's pretty tough. And people assumed that she would just be a placeholder leader. But she has also taken on a very strong stance against the Russians, and that's made her very popular. Now, recently, there has been a rise in far right-wing parties in Europe in general. And they reach out to women. They really reach out to women. And there's only been one presidential candidate so far, the daughter of another presidential candidate in France. I don't know if you're familiar with the Le Pens. I don't know if you heard about it. A few years ago, Madonna attacked her and had images of her with swastikas and Marine Le Pen with swastikas on and things like that. And Marine Le Pen sued her. I don't actually know what happened with that case, but I'm going to sue Madonna for that. She did not win the election, but the National Front Party in France gets more and more votes every year, every election year. So in Norway and Denmark, these women are legislators, but there's suggestion that they will be presidential candidates in the future. And then finally, the British monarch isn't really supposed to reveal any party or political policy preference. But Queen Elizabeth II is now being called, at least by some, a progressive ruler because she just signed a new Commonwealth charter that opposes discrimination based on gender, which has also been interpreted to include LGBTQ rights against discrimination. Serving in the name of Queen Elizabeth are governors general throughout the Commonwealth, and they're called Commonwealth. It's called the Commonwealth of Nations now, rather than the British Commonwealth, to sound less imperialistic. And they carry out these, ceremonial duties in the name of a ceremonial ruler. So I'm not counting these two governors general in my analysis, but I thought they deserved at least a mention. So, like I said, there's not enough data yet, but do you see any emerging patterns? I'm sorry.
If one of their fathers or a brother or someone like that held power before them, they're a lot more likely to be elected.
Yeah, and certainly we can see that with Argentina, we can see that with South Korea. Okay. Well, if you look at the distribution across the ideological spectrum, it's fairly even. So what does that tell us then? So some of these women are doing what we call in political science a kick-ass job. Some are not, but it appears to be, so far, that ideology does trump gender. That's my initial analysis. The election results in each country are in keeping with the ideological shifts of the country. So it's not like people are jumping party lines to vote for women. These women are in keeping with the party preferences of the electorate. So looks like this hypothesis might be that. We'll see. So at this point, I think we can start to argue that there is no such thing as a universal woman. These women are ideologically different, and they are shaped by things other than just their gender. Now, when we think about differences between leadership styles, do we then also have to think about history, political culture, context, these intersections of other factors, ethnicity, class, sexual orientation, that can shape how a leader behaves? In other words, does gender matter? Yeah, gender matters. But though we don't have conclusive data yet, I think we can confidently hypothesize that other factors also matter, and in some cases might matter more. So this then leads to the obvious question, all these other countries have had female leaders. Why not here? Right? Well, it's not for lack of trying. And what kind of woman? What kind of woman? Would it be this? Or this? If you remember, that was yelled out to Hillary in the 2008 election at one of her campaign stops. And now you can get a t-shirt. So I ask my students, if Panama and Sri Lanka can have a woman president, why not the United States? Why can't the United States have a woman president? I wanted to hear, when I asked my students, I wanted to hear if I would get the same answer as when I was in my university political science classes, and I did, although there are fewer who are saying it. And generally the answer is, we have too much at stake to have a woman president. I mean, it's okay for Panama. It's okay for Sri Lanka, right? We're the global superpower. So, a 2013 poll, I think that, sorry, I messed that up there. A 2013 poll found that 86% of Americans think the country is ready to elect a woman president, and that nearly 75% think that we will elect one in 2016. This is up from 72% who thought we were ready when I first started teaching women politics and culture about 8 years ago. So it's a definite rise. But then what does it mean to be ready? What does that mean? I'll actually open it. What does it mean to be ready?
Willing to accept it.
Have we overcome these archaic gender assumptions? We're ready? Something from this same poll that I thought was particularly interesting is that 49% of voters said they would be more engaged in the 2016 election if a woman threw her hat into the ring. Oh, that was interesting, right? Almost half would be more engaged. So how many of you, just by raise of hand, how many of you think we are ready? How many of you are willing to admit or that we're ready? Are we ready? Or was that peer pressure? Don't want to admit that you don't think that we're ready. How many of you think it will be 2016? Will it be 2016? That she gets elected. That she gets elected. Okay, so the numbers went down. So I timed it better than I thought I did. This is obviously an incomplete study. I will collect more data, which I can only do, right, if more women keep winning elections. But I'll keep working on it in my free time. Are there any questions? Yes.
I noticed earlier this week that Angela Merkel passed a law requiring that all corporations in Germany must now have 30% of their board be comprised by women. Basically, it has to happen like overnight. And I'm curious, in your study, have you seen that women in executive positions in countries have actually advanced the position of women in any cases? I mean, what is the significance of having a female executive in terms of the law for the rest of the population?
Right. Are women leaders good for other women? Across the board? I'll preface it with another story. When I was in Nicaragua, I met with a lot of women, because that was what I was doing down there for my research. And, Nicaragua had a woman president, Violeta Chamorro. And these women, across the board, said that Violeta Chamorro was the worst thing that had ever happened to women in the history, the modern history of Nicaragua. Now, that's a little bit overstated. But they all universally argued that that women's rights declined under her. And in fact, they did, right? Because she was the first president after the Sandinista Revolution. Under the Sandinista Revolution, women were granted a lot of rights, right? Rights that had not previously existed. So it was a lot of change in a really quick amount of time. And then, opened it up to elections. The Sandinistas were booted out, and Violeta Chamorro came in. But she was center-right, and yeah, she really reversed a lot of those advances for women. Margaret Thatcher did nothing for women, and in fact hurt women, right? And so, yeah, that's a good question. And it kind of, again, falls along party lines. So, but not always, because I would argue that Fernández de Kirchner is kind of a mixed bag. Mostly because of the whole reproductive rights issue. So I would, she hasn't necessarily promoted women in higher government positions. I mean, she's encouraged it, but she hasn't actively promoted, at least in my estimation. Whereas I think Bachelet has. And yeah, I mean, even here it's a mixed bag. I would say that yes, in Denmark, yes, in Switzerland, and sort of in Malta, kind of also in Brazil, but it's not always really clear. So they might encourage, and even by, another argument is that even by just simply existing in power, they are doing something for women, right? Because they're showing my daughter that she too can be a leader, right? So if we balance that, Grace, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add, if Le Pen were to become a leader of France, she would be awful for women, but particularly women of color, right?
Right.
So kind of that whole thing of bringing in the intersectional analysis is really important, I think.
Right, and that's why, yeah, so as we move further and further, so here it's not absolutely yes, that they have been, the champions of women. But the further we actually move to the right, the less so it becomes. And, some have argued that, well, you have to give these women, especially if they're in their first term, you have to give them a break, right? That's an argument that's out there. That, they have to demonstrate that they are legitimate rulers, and they can't just start out, just encouraging and promoting women. Right? They have to wait till the second term, right, to do that. I don't buy that. But that's the argument, that they will become perceived less favorably if they are seen as, as champions of women. And in some countries, women do not want to be called feminists, even if we think that they are acting like feminists. They don't want to use that word because that is also perceived negatively. And perception is everything when you're a politician. Right? So yes, the further we get to the right, it seems to be less so. But again, that's sort of in my estimation about what I think is good for women. The far right certainly is appealing to women, and it's using nationalism to appeal to, pure domestic women, right? And they're using actually, and I'm not trying to be, overly rhetorical when I say this, they're using some of the same tactics that the Nazis did, right, when they appealed to women. In how they, are the mothers of their nations, and they are the mothers of a pure bloodline, and here come all of these immigrants and, just mess it all up. And a lot of these women that they appeal to are workers themselves, workers who are threatened by immigrant workers. And so that's been one of the tactics they've used to appeal to, you know, the women of the correct ethnicity, you know, by throwing the immigrants under the bus. So they really have launched campaigns to try to get to women voters, but not in a way that I think is appropriate. Yeah. Julie?
Seems like I just read recently that the best country to be a woman in is Iceland.
Yeah, yeah. That is often the case. Even though there was a woman prime minister, there's not anymore, and it's still the best place to be a woman. Yeah. Yeah, it's usually, if you look at the gender index that's put out by the UN, it's usually the Nordic countries who are at top. Now, Norway has moved down a little bit, but it's still in the top 10. You know what the United States is in the gender index?
57.
No, it's not that bad. Let's see. Last time I checked was last semester. It was 16. I think we're 16. But we're number 1. Economically, maybe not in terms of gender. Yes, Iceland is a good place to be a woman. Worst place to be a woman, Afghanistan, and it's sometimes, it used to be Afghanistan tied with Sierra Leone, I think it was, but Afghanistan's kind of pulled ahead. Yeah, yes.
This is probably a whole nother discussion, but, you know, your initial question, how would it be different if women ruled? You know, that cannot be looked at in an absolute ideal way because we are coming from a male-dominated society anyway. You know, you do have to work within the system that you've got, and women are damned if they are women or male-like. So, you know, so they have to work within that system, but they're obviously not the same, no matter what.
A recent study, again, and it was U.S. and it was legislative, demonstrated that, you know, here's why, and I think the headline was, here's why we should have more women in politics. Because it's been demonstrated that women, at least in the United States legislature, do work more cooperatively. They do work across the aisle more than men legislators tend to. The question, though, that I have about that is that, you know, still kind of, they also push more bills, work harder, and are more efficient. That has been demonstrated these days. I wonder, though, if that is part of the underdog effect, because women have to prove themselves, and so they do work harder, and they do push. But if women achieve parity, would that level off? Yeah, it's like, okay, I've made it. I can put my feet up for just a few minutes a day. Yeah.
So everyone here on the far right has yet to attain political office either through appointment or election. So if we remove these from the data set, doesn't it then skew more center left?
It does slightly, right? So we have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the center right, 5 in the center. We don't count them just yet. 6 on the center left, and 2 on the left. So yes, we are slightly more left, and then a little bit more with her, and a little bit more with her. But we're not counting. Can't count the Queen of England, Elizabeth II, because you know, the joke was that she had become this progressive queen for supporting LGBTQ rights without ever having said the words gay or lesbian. That was the joke. So yes, we do still skew towards the center left, absolutely. But if we're looking for patterns, even though we're still more towards the center left, it's not insignificant that we have all of these women on the right. So in terms of whether there is a universal woman, I just don't think we can say. Are women more progressive overall? Slightly. Yeah. And then all bets are off if these women, if these women win. But, and I actually won't be surprised. I would be surprised in France if she wins anytime soon. But I won't be surprised in Norway or even Denmark, just because of the shift, the recent shift to the far right. But you're right. And I will tell you this, though, that when I started collecting this type of data about 10 years ago, this center right did not really exist. I mean, there were a couple maybe, right? But it changes every other year because people go, people come, and it was much more significantly toward the center left. So that's why maybe that's why this sticks out. I mean, I'm giving it more importance than I should. But this is just really, I mean, I think it speaks against a lot of our assumptions and I don't know, hopes and dreams maybe. Any other questions? So yes, this is an incomplete study. I'll still be collecting data.
We'll hope you get really busy collecting data because so many more are elected.
Yes, that would be a good problem to have.
I have a question.
Yes.
Now that you have a broader sample, at least across the ideological spectrum, can you compare that to how Forbes or anybody else would say their power was? Have you compared those roles and seeing if women tend to be more, like the more powerful women leaders tend to be of one ideological lean or others that a mixed bag?
There are, the ones that Forbes describes as the most powerful, either woman or person, are center, with one, I'm sorry, there's one exception, and that's Brazil. But not on the left. But that's, again, that I think has less to do necessarily with ideology, although you think coming from Forbes they would be looking at these things a little bit differently. But Forbes will list men, even if they're more to the left. This has to do really with economic standing. So Brazil, right, is really important in terms of, or Rousseff has been really bold in pushing Brazil into this globalization program, and Brazil has, is really on the forefront. And then really we see center or center right more where we start to see the power. But again, could that have something? Another study. I didn't bring it. I had all these things, but I thought we were going to run out of time, so I kind of started throwing things out. That if women are going to be elected more, the hypothesis was that it would be conservative women, right? That more and more we would start to see conservative women because even though they're still women, they're tougher than progressive women, right? And so they would, the countries that were really powerful would vote for conservative women because they had so much at stake, right? So they don't want to, risk it with a further left woman, and that might be coming into play here as well. All right. Well, thanks for listening to my incomplete study. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.